What is up, dudes and lady dudes? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today I have more Yu-Gi-Oh news. Of course, we have the almost full Doremichord archetype going on here, which is really exciting. We saw the boss monster yesterday. I think that was kind of like a Valentine's Day maybe reveal. Like, okay, it's like a cute girl pink kind of thing. I don't know. That works, I guess. So today we're going to be going over pretty much, I think, 11 other cards for the archetype, which is very cool. We're going to have a very good idea of what this archetype wants to do after this video, and I actually have like sort of set up. It's doable for now. I'm going to improve things. We're going to try and you know, get further and further into this, and hopefully you know, adjust the setup and get it exactly where I want it to be. But for now, we are looking pretty good. So without further ado, let's just start off with our first monster here. We have Doremichord Cutea. This is a level 1 Earth Fairy Pendulum monster. 100 attack, 400 defense. She's a scale 8, so high scale. And her pendulum effect reads as follows. Your Doremichord Pendulum monster's pendulum summon cannot be negated. That's very interesting, because like not a ton of stuff negates pendulum summons. It has to be specifically stuff that negates the summon and inherent summons. That's like really the only way to negate a pendulum summon, because it is an inherent summon. It's by mechanic, not by effect. So very interesting there. And then for its monster's effects. First effect is a hard must return. It reads, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one Doremichord Pendulum monster from deck to hand. Okay, we got ourselves a Stratos. Not bad. We'll take it. It's a +1. We know how pendulum archetypes love +1s. Load yourself up with extra scales. Load yourself up with extra monsters to pendulum summon. Very cool. No level restriction on this, by the way, so keep that in mind as well. And its second effect says, if you have an even number pendulum scale, so as long as just it's an even number in your pendulum zones, Doremichord pendulum monsters you control gain 100 attack times the pendulum scale total you control. Okay, so the total times 100. So if you had like another 8 and a 1, every one of your Doremichords would gain 900. That's actually not terrible. I know she starts at 100, so she'll only go to 1,000. It'd be nice if she had like 1,000 and she'd actually go up to like almost 2k, but I understand that you don't want a level 1 Stratos that can also be like 2,000 attack and buff all your other stuff, but she could be nice just to like help you put extra damage on the board. Not bad. It's a Stratos. We'll take that. That's a good card right there. Next up, we have Doremichord Dreamia. This is a level 2 wind fairy. So we're fairies, by the way. It's all confirmed it's fairies. We're not spellcasters, which I guess is fine. I'm kind of happy about that. There's so much disgusting nonsense you can do if we get more good spellcaster pendulum monsters. So I'm okay with them being fairies. Anyway, 600 attack, 400 defense, still very small. Pendulum scale 7. Now, this is the beginning of where we start getting very interesting. Keep in mind, the boss monster we saw yesterday was scale 1. That girl we just saw, the level 1, is scale 8. This one's now scale 7. The scales are not all matching up. Keep that in mind. It has the same pendulum effect where your Doremichord pendulum monsters cannot have their pendulum summons negated. Fine. And it has a hard one's return on the first effect. If there is a Doremichord card in your pendulum zone, you can special summon this card from the hand. All right. And the second effect, if you have an odd number pendulum scale in your pendulum zone and a Doremichord pendulum monster card you control would be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can destroy this card instead of one of that card or cards, which is pretty cool. Okay, so this card is like not insane, but I think it's like not terrible. Sometimes in pendulums you see you just want to be able to drop 2 monsters on the field, and this could actually be a pretty cool card. I get it. It has to be a Doremichord card, so this doesn't like splash necessarily in like other pendulum decks where like all you have to do is put a pendulum scale up and it can jump out of the hand. Not quite that like generic, but still jumps out of the hand in the deck. That's not terrible. It makes for a decent target to search off of Cutea as an extender. And the second effect is fine. So this seems to be the gimmick of the archetype. As long as you have like the same odd or even scale in your pendulum zone, certain monsters, depending on what their scale is, odd or even, will get an additional effect. This one just gives the ability to trade itself instead of other monsters being destroyed by card effect. Fine, not an amazing effect. If it just said negate it, if it's then that'd be cool. Or like just it can't be destroyed, that'd be cool. So you don't actually give up a resource, but you still give up the card itself anyway. So it's fine. I think this one's fine. Next up, we have Doremichord Elitia. This is a level 3 water fairy, 1100 attack, 400 defense, still pretty small. Pendulum scale 6. If you've seen the pattern, we're going down and down as our levels go up and up. Same effect in the pendulum scale. Your pendulum summons for Doremichord monsters cannot be negated. Then has a hard ones to turn first effect. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one spell or trap card your opponent controls. Return it to the hand. Second effect, if you have an even number pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you take no battle damage from battles involving Doremichord pendulum monsters. Okay, so this card is interesting. It just bounces a back row, really. But I guess it's searchable, so I guess technically it's searchable back row removal. Removes potential floodgates, which can be problems for decks like pendulums. Decks like cards like there can be only one for sure. This card could be a decent out or a way to just clear it off the field, which is nice. But other than that, it really doesn't do much for you. Maybe it's a one of just for that utility spell and trap removal. Of course, you always want to destroy, banish, shuffle, back row. You don't really want to bounce it to hand because if it's a trap, they reset it, get to use it again. If it's a spell, they can just use it again straight up. So this card's fine. I don't think it's that good, but it's utility, I guess. Next up, we have Doremichord Fancia. This is a level 4 fire fairy. 1600 attack, 400 defense. A little bit bigger, but still pretty small. All things considered, 16 is still pretty weak for a 4-star. It's a pendulum scale 5. So again, the level goes up, the scale goes down. Same pendulum effect. Just can't have your pendulum summons negated. Fine. First effect is a hard one's return. During your main phase, you can take one Doremichord pendulum monster from your deck, except for itself, and place it face up in the extra deck. That's actually pretty good. I mean, we know in pendulums, let's just throw it in the extra deck. That's going to give us one extra card that we might be able to pendulum summon out. That's pretty good, but it also gives you like utility, like, oh, if you haven't had access. Well, okay, so this is interesting because she's level 1. So you can't really pen summon her out because I don't even know if any, I'm sure there are some, right, that have 0 scales, but this deck does not have a 0 scale. So you can't pen summon her. So sending her doesn't really help you. So you got to send something else, which is interesting, right? But that is still good utility, especially if we get any more future monsters, for sure. Just getting you that extra fodder. Second effect, if you had an odd number pendulum scale in the pendulum zone and a Doremichord pendulum monster you control would be destroyed by battle, you can destroy this card instead. So the same protection effect as our girl up here. It just protects from battle instead of card effects. So it's fine. The main effect is obviously that first one, though. Technically, you're just throwing a free resource back up into your extra deck. It's like Electromite, but like in archetype, kind of, and not nearly as good, but interesting. All right, then we move to some of the other higher level monsters. We have Doremichord Gracia. This is a level 5 water fairy, 2100 attack, 1400 defense, scale 4. The level goes up, the scale goes down. Keep that in mind. But this one actually has a different effect. This one, all the high level ones, the 5s and higher, actually have different pendulum effects. We saw the girl yesterday. But when a pendulum summon of a Doremichord pendulum monster, or when you pendulum summon a Doremichord pendulum monster or monsters, your opponent cannot activate monster effects or spell or trap cards. It's actually pretty big. I mean, on pendulum summon is actually a pretty big spot for people to want to activate cards like Torrential Tribute, right? Like a lot of those kinds of cards, like, oh, I'm gonna battle butler you. Nope, you have to wait for any of my effects to trigger first. They'll resolve, most importantly, and then you can worry about responding, which is pretty cool. So that's really nice. And then for her her extra effects, her first effect for the monster effects is once per turn. If it's normal or special summon, you can add a Doremichord spell or trap card from your deck to hand. That's actually really nice. This makes this card probably the premier target for you to be sending to the extra deck with Fancia. If you didn't already have access to this card, you probably just want to throw it in the extra deck so you can just pen summon it out and boom, get yourself a free spell or trap card. Not too shabby. Also, if you have an even number of pendulum scale in your pendulum zone and your Doremichord pendulum monster attacks, your opponent cannot activate monster effects until the end of the damage step. this is a small effect. I guess it can come up in very, very specific situations, but I wouldn't expect it to come up that often. But she's a 2100 beater, so that's really nice. There you can kind of like outplay your opponent by, you know, trying to rush into the battle phase, forcing them to activate things early because they know they won't be able to activate things once you attack. So that could be cool, but I don't expect it to be that important. But mainly the search is really nice. This is actually another really good one. Next up, we have La Doremichord Angelia. This is a level 6 fire fairy, 2300 attack, so they're getting big now, which is nice. 1400 defense, scale 3, so a nice low scale, that matters. When you pendulum summon a Doremichord pendulum monster or monsters, your opponent can activate monster effects or spell or trap cards. Great, the same one that all the big ones have, very nice. Here we go. Its first effect is a hard once per turn. During your main phase, you contribute one Doremichord pendulum monster, and if you do, special summon a Doremichord pendulum monster with a pendulum scale that is too higher or too lower than that attributed monsters from your deck, except for itself. So what I like about this is it doesn't say tribute one other, which means it can just tribute itself and tutor for any Doremichord that's this one is what, scale 3, so you can find the scale 5 or the scale 7, right? No, the scale 5 or the scale 1, sorry. So the scale 1 is just the boss monster. You can just tutor for the boss monster, which is fine, or you can tutor for Fancia, and Fancia is the one that gets you to send. So tutor for Fancia, send Gracia, and then if you can pen summon Gracia, boom, that's going to get you your search for your spell or traps. I think that's pretty good. I think those are two of the better options to be able to tutor into, and of course you could tribute any of the other ones and then get into other stuff and go from there, which is very cool as well. I like that effect actually pretty well. It is pretty good Ash target, but you know, what are you gonna do? Everything's a good Ash target in 2021. If you have an odd number pendulum scale in your pendulum zone and your Doremichord pendulum monster attacks, your opponent can activate spell or trap cards or effects until the end of the damage step. So whereas Gracia is monster effects, this one's the same thing but for spells and traps. Fine, same thing. You can bait out spells and traps before you go battle phase because your opponent knows once you attack, they're just gonna have to eat it. They can't respond. So very cool. Not crazy, but I like her first effect. I think she's one of the better ones as well. And then we finish up here as far as the new monsters go with C Doremichord Butea. She's a level 7 Earth Fairy, 2500 attack, 2400 defense, scale 2. And she has that same big effect where your opponent can activate pretty much just effects when you pendulum summon Doremichord monsters. Fine. You can only use its first effect once per turn. Quick effect. You can target one effect monster your opponent controls. During this turn, if that card would leave the field, banish it. If you have an even number pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you can target one face-up spell or trap card your opponent controls instead. And the second effect, once per turn at the start of the damage step, when this card battles a monster with an attack that is equal to or higher than the lowest pendulum scale in your pendulum zone times 300, you can destroy that monster. So that's not that important. I guess it is kind of nice because she's still only 25, so if there is a bigger monster on the field, she can just attack something that's like bigger than like your lowest pendulum scale times 300 and just like pop it, kind of just do like a El Shaddai construct effect, which is kind of cool. That could come up. I don't expect it to all the time, but fine. What I really want to talk about is the quick effect here, because I actually think this is a nice little bonus disruption to throw into the archetype here. I think that's going to make this card actually pretty good in the deck. Targeting, it's not a blanket macrocosmos, but it does give you the opportunity to target something on field and say, that one's not going to end up engraved for you. Not on my watch, it won't. And you also have the bonus of even doing spells and traps. So what I like is that I believe the way this works is even if you were to chain this to an Eldritch card like Scarlet Sanguine, right? The card is still up when you target it, if you're targeting it in response to its activation, and then it would attempt to leave the field on resolution, and I think it would get banished there. So this does give you a way to like mitigate stuff like that. So there's just a little bit of versatility in there. I actually kind of like that. I actually think this is a pretty good card. I like this. I wanted to see some extra disruption because her disruption is not overly insane. We already talked about this, but it's just like it like pops a monster when it activates its effect. It's a fine disruption, but it's not great. So adding this to it is pretty good, especially if you can end on anything else. That is it for the monster zone. Moving into the spells, we have Doremichord Scale. This is a normal spell card. You can only activate one of this card per turn. And its effect reads, apply these effects in sequence according to the number of Doremichord Pendulum monster cards you control with different names. If you control 3 or more, you can return 1 card from your Pendulum Zone to the hand, and if you do, place 1 Doremichord Pendulum monster from your face-up extra deck to your Pendulum Zone. Okay. 5 or more, you can special summon a Doremichord Pendulum monster from your hand. Not bad. I mean, like, if it was from deck, I'd actually be like, oh. And 7 or more, destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls. This card really is just one of those cards where, like, if like the 3 or more effect was like really solid, I'd actually be interested. But it's honestly just not. I get it, it's searchable, but like it just feels like a card that if you're not resolving it for 7 or more, is it really worth it? Probably not. So I don't love this card all that much, in all honesty. So I don't know, not my favorite card for sure. Moving on here, we have Doremichord Harmonia. This is a field spell. You can select and activate one of these effects. That's just it. Once per turn, you can you can only select these effects of Doremichord Harmonia once per turn each. Okay, so you can, so I believe it's just, it has 3 effects and just once per turn, you just pick one. Okay, that's fine. The first effect says add 1 Doremichord Pendulum monster from your face-up extra deck to your hand. That's actually pretty good. Just loading stuff back into your hand is pretty nice. That's just good follow-up, and even potentially extendability. Like after you've linked something off or done whatever, like to get it an extra deck, just add it back, and that's more fuel. Could potentially provide you with a bigger pendulum summon because you might not have zones to summon everything in your extra deck. So adding it back to hand gives you extra fodder for that, or just follow-up. It's pretty good. Second effect says have 1 Doremichord card in your Pendulum Zone gain pendulum scales equal till its level until the end of this turn. Okay, so slight modulation that can come up. Obviously, we're looking at you know, all of the monsters here and trying to see, you know, they all have to match up like certain scales, certain at least odd or even scales to make things work for them. So that's not bad. And the last effect says if you control 3 or more Doremichord Pendulum monster cards with different names that have odd number pendulum scales or that have even number pendulum scales, you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls. That is quite a fucking stipulation. Damn. So you'd have to control 3 or more Doremichord Pendulum monster cards with different names, and they have to all have odd number pendulum scales or all have even number scales. And if they do, you just pop a card. That's kind of an effect that, like, if you can, it just gives you removal. I like that it doesn't target. Doesn't target is nice. Still just pop something though. I think this is fine. I think mainly you're going to be using the first effect. I think this is definitely a playable card just because of that first effect. The third effect could come up, and the second effect, I guess, could also come up in certain plays. I don't know if this is going to be a combo deck. It seems a little more control-y to me, but we'll have to see. Pendulums tend to be more combo-y in general. Next up, we have Doremichord Musica. It's a trap, a normal trap. You can only activate 1 card with this card's name per turn, and this one kind of does the same thing as well. You get to select one of these effects to activate based on the pendulum scale of Doremichord Pendulum monster cards you control. If it's an odd number, or if you have it, select 1. Okay, so if you have an odd number scale, you can special summon a Doremichord Pendulum monster with an odd number scale from your extra deck. Okay. If there's an even number scale, you can special summon a Doremichord Pendulum monster with an even number pendulum scale from your face of extra deck. So same thing, just either an odd or an even. And the last one says both odd and even. So if you have exactly an odd and an even in scale, you can just target 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it. That's kind of nice. I wish this was a little stronger, because that's some setup. You got to have exactly the right 2 kinds of scales, and all it does is just Trident. I guess Trident's pretty good, but it's targeting destruction, man. It is searchable though, so I guess that's another thing. I believe the level 5 can search this. Yep, so you do have access to a little more disruption, which is nice, because I've already talked about this, that like this one plus this one, they are disruptions and they're fine, but they're not amazing. So I really wanted to see a little more disruption from the archetype. So I guess that's another alley you can get to disruption with, but I don't think it's anything crazy. It's fine. It's fine. And the last card we have here today is a counter trap, Doremichord Formal. This is a counter trap. Of course, you can only activate one card with its name per turn. When your opponent activates a monster effect or a spell or trap card, and you control a Doremichord card in your Pendulum zone, shuffle one Pendulum monster from your face-up deck into the deck, then apply these effects. Pendulum monsters you control are unaffected by that opponent's effect. Cards in your Pendulum zones cannot be destroyed by that opponent's effect, and cards in your Pendulum zones cannot be banished by that opponent's card effect. I mean, listen, I was just talking about how this deck needed like more disruption. If this was like an Orcus Crescendo card, I'd be super, like, that would be the card that like really helps pull it back for me a little bit. I feel like overall this archetype's a little bit underwhelming. If this was like Orcus Crescendo, it was like a negate and banish, omni negate and banish. If all you have is like a Doremichord pendulum scale, right? Pretty easy to set up. Boom, negate and banish anything. Then engrave, like on the next turn, you could just like banish it and just like search any Doremichord monster. Then we're looking at a pure version that actually can do some things, but unfortunately it doesn't do that. It actually doesn't even disrupt your opponent at all. It just kind of gives you like decent protection. If it and also another thing is, if this was like pendulum monsters become unaffected by card effects for the rest of the turn, that's another thing, because if you just put up big bodies and say they're all towers till the end of the turn, come at me, right? Like that's one thing, cool, but it doesn't. It just protects them from that one effect, which means if it's not a removal effect, it's not that good. So I don't know if this card's playable at all. I don't really like it. This one's maybe a 1 of or a 2 of, just because it's actually extra disruption. And the rest are decent. I think some of the monsters are decent, but I don't think any of them are like, wow, that's crazy. It's like, okay, this one searches you monsters, but it can't be pen summoned, so that's okay. This one summons from hands, so it's an okay extender. Bouncing back row, weak as hell. Sending to the extra deck, that's actually not bad, gives you extra material, so that one's like decent. This one searches you for a spell or trap, but we just looked at all 4 of them, and like one spell's okay and one trap's okay. The other 2 are terrible. And she gives you what? She's the tutor. She lets you tutor like straight out of the deck, so she's like decent, but she's also weak to certain things, so she's okay. This one gives you disruption, but it's kind of a weaker disruption. It's not a full-on macrocosmos while it's on the field like Shen is. It's just target one card once per turn and that'll get banished. It's fine, but it's not like crazy. And then of course she gives you like the Papa Monster disruption, and she can like negate face up cards, which is fine, but it's not a quick effect. So I think overall the archetype's cool. I'm interested in them. Keep in mind also that just like the other 2 archetypes, they did not reveal every single card. I actually think we got everything except for the last card, which, because this is a trap and the 26th card in the set is not revealed, I'm assuming it's going to be a 3rd trap. I really hope it's a powerful disruption or some kind of crazy trap. Hopefully, because it's the only card not revealed, it's something that's really going to tie everything together. That's really all I can hope at this point. At the end of the day, I think it's cool. I think that the idea is cool. There's no restrictions, by the way. That's another cool thing with this so far, is that there's nothing here that says like you can't summon anything but Doremichords for the rest of the turn. You could splash other pendulum archetypes in here and you know, make an amalgamation, as we've tend to see with the pendulum cards. But that's it for me here. I know there's a lot of cards, kind of went a little long for me, but I wanted to be thorough because I think this is a really interesting archetype, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. If you made it this far, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think on this archetype? Are you in? Are you out? Obviously, I don't think it's meta. I don't think anyone would think it's meta, but does it have a chance to be a rogue deck? That's really what I look for out of these deck packs. It's decks that can compete with other solid decks, not win every match and own the meta. So I'd be happy with just that. We still have another card to go, just like the other 2 archetypes. Hopefully all 3 of those cards are going to be good and help these archetypes seem a little more, desirable, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's going to do it for me here today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, with my new setup, it's going to be nicer. It's going to be better than this. I'm going to fix it up. We're going to change some things around, and we'll get it up to where I want it to be. But thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff from me in the future, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.